Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12. Now, when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the reading of the word of our Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Now you may be seated. This is the final in our Don't Worry, Be Happy series. And you will find some notes in your bulletin that we'll be filling in as we go along. Today we're talking about inner peace. Inner peace. It's, listen to what Dr. Phil has to say about inner. Well, this is important, isn't it? What Dr. Phil has to say about inner peace. Dr. Phil proclaimed, the way to achieve inner peace is to finish all the things you have started. So I looked around my house to see all the things I started and hadn't finished, and before leaving the house this morning, I finished off a bottle of Merlot, a package of Oreos, the remainder of my old Prozac prescription, the rest of the cheesecake, some Doritos, and a box of chocolates. You have no idea how good I feel right now. Please pass this on to anyone you think who's in need of inner peace. Well, to tell you the truth, this sermon isn't so much about inner peace as it is about peacemaking. But there's an interesting correlation there that you're probably going to catch on to as we go along. And that is that if you are a peacemaker, you're likely to find some inner peace for yourself. Church tends to be a place of conflict. Now, I haven't gotten a lot of that here, and I thank you for that. In fact, I've missed you a lot. 2 weeks. My goodness, I just can't be apart from family for that long, you know. But I have experienced a lot of conflict in churches. My second church that I served, we had this huge Wednesday night program. It was an interesting church. It was a small church. Our sanctuary was smaller than this one, but similar in size. We could seat 75, and on Sunday morning we would have 80. So we'd have some seated off to the side there. The place was packed. If you were a visitor to the church, you would have trouble finding a place to sit. Or I guarantee you would sit in somebody else's seat, you know. You know how that works, right? On Wednesday night, we had a Wednesday night program where we served a meal. And then after the meal, the kids went to what we call Kids Club. It was almost like a mini summer vacation Bible school, if you would, every Wednesday night. And the adults went to their adult Bible study. And we were having a meeting one time. Oh, by the way, we only could seat 75 on Sunday morning, but on Wednesday nights, we'd have 80 or 90 people there. It was that well attended. We were having a meeting one time, and a couple of people said in the meeting, we got to stop this Wednesday night thing. The kids are running around the sanctuary. They're messing up our pretty church, basically, was the complaint. And if we just stop serving that meal, that's the only reason they come, they'd stop coming. Oh, great. The reason we serve the Sunday night meal, is so that they'll come. And maybe, get a little Jesus on the way out the door. That would be kind of fun. I considered it to be really successful ministry. The first Wednesday night that we had, our property was next to a public park. And there were always kids over there shooting baskets and what have you. And so our first Wednesday night, we cooked hamburgers and hot dogs on the grill. And I told our youth, run over to the park and invite all those kids to come over and we'll feed them. And we did. And they kept coming back on Wednesday nights. Even when it was winter, even when they had to be inside, they kept coming back. One of the people at that meeting said these words, those kids, we ought to just hang them all up on meat hooks. Can you imagine even saying that? That's when I created my first list of ethics for meetings, how we will conduct ourselves in meetings. Should I have to do that? No. Did I have to do that? Yeah, I had to do it, unfortunately. Hopefully then we would be able to have a rational discussion. So, this is about making peace. Matthew 5:9. Happy are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. This isn't about peace lovers. It's not about peaceful. It's about peacemakers. Those who actively seek to resolve conflict. And I'm on number 1 now in your notes if you're following along. So here's some misconceptions about peacemaking. The first one is it's not avoiding. Now I will preface this point by saying that I am usually just preaching to myself. And you get to listen in on this conversation that's going on in my head, And if you get something out of that, that's great. And if you don't, hopefully at least I will. Because I can tell you right off the top, I don't like conflict. I despise conflict. And my first instinct is to run from any conflict. So, peacemaking is not about avoiding. It's not about saying, I don't want to talk about it. And actually, to just be brutal, that's a type of cowardice, not willing to engage, if you will. And the second misconception is it's not about appeasement. God didn't ask us to be doormats. And in fact, you may remember that Jesus stood his ground on many occasions, right? So it's not about appeasement whatsoever. And number 2, why be a peacemaker? Well, there's unresolved conflict, right? There's always unresolved conflict. In fact, if there's 2 people in a room, there's probably going to be some conflict. It's just a guarantee. It's a guarantee. They always said every small town has to have at least 2 lawyers, right? Right. Because there's always unresolved conflict. So why be a peacemaker? First one is it blocks my fellowship with God. 1 John 4:20 through 21. How can a man say, I love God, and hate his brother at the same time? You can't have fellowship with God if you are out of fellowship with people. Is there a cross here today somewhere? Oh, it's over there. Okay. So I want you to think about the cross for just a moment. There's a horizontal on the cross, and the horizontal for today represents our relationships with each other, okay? That's the horizontal. The vertical on the cross represents our relationship with God for today. And you're going to find out as we go along today that relationships are really, really, really important to God. Okay? I can't overemphasize how important relationships are with God. Our relationships with each other and our relationship with Him. The vertical and the horizontal. And the next one is it prevents answered prayer. Imagine this. It's 1 Peter 3:7. Husbands, if you don't treat your wife right, forget about praying. Isn't that amazing? So if our relationships aren't right, even our prayers are a problem. If we want answers to prayer, we need to have our relationships right. So, reconciliation is a prerequisite for worship. In fact, there are some denominations that say if you have a problem with your brother or sister, right, anyone, then you shouldn't take communion, all right? It's that whole idea of relationships. If you don't have communion with other people, then you can't have communion with God. Pretty powerful, isn't it? I hope it's incentive to make things right with people. And that way you'll be able to make things right with God. All right, and the next one is it hinders my happiness. Now here's something that I've had to tell people all the time. When you're frustrated, when you're angry, when you're hurt, when somebody's done you wrong, there's a song, right? Done you wrong song? When somebody's done you wrong, who suffers from your anger or your frustration? It's not them. It's never them. It's always you. You're the one that suffers. It hinders your happiness. Job 18:4, you are only hurting yourself with your anger. Conflict causes you pain. The other person, they're just fine. A reason to be a peacemaker. And now number 3, how to become a peacemaker. By the way, my wife told me I preached too long. There are these incredibly rare occasions when my wife is right. And there are even rarer occasions when I actually listen to her. So, I'm doing my best to shorten this, and especially since we have a big day today. So, moving along, how to become a peacemaker. We're going to use the letters of peace, P-E-A-C-E, and see if we can figure this out. So the P is to plan a peace conference. Plan a peace conference. Matthew 5:23 and 24. If you remember your brother has something against you, go at once to make peace. Now here's the most important point here. It's always your move. I'll repeat that. It's always your move. You see, when somebody has caused us problem, when there's some rift between you and somebody else, you think, well, I'm not calling them. They owe me an apology. I'm waiting for them to call me. Well, guess what? If you're a peacemaker, you make the call anyway. You make the call anyway. So it's always your move. It doesn't matter who did what to whom, and you can rehash that in your head 1,000 times. It's still your responsibility as a peacemaker, your responsibility as a Christian to make the first move. It's hard, isn't it? But that's what God calls us to. And we need to do it immediately. When I was a brand new pastor, I actually, in those days, we started a new appointment on June 1st, and I was appointed to a little church, my first little church. I was going to seminary, and on the 1st of July, we had a birthday party. I had been a pastor for a whole glorious month. And somebody actually stopped at the parsonage where we were having the party, knocked on the door, tears running down their face. "My mom is dying. Can you come to the hospital?" So I went to the hospital. As a green rookie pastor, in a situation where I was instantly way over my head. Way over my head. There was a man and the rest of the family were all sitting in the waiting room, and the hospital wasn't letting them back into the critical care where Mom was. They said they were going to, and eventually they started letting them come back one or two at a time to see their mom because they knew she wasn't going to make it. There was one man there who had come from California because he heard his mother was dying. He had not seen or spoken to his mom in 20 years. Now, I don't know what the rift was between them, but he was sitting there in the waiting room, and he couldn't go back to her room. He couldn't imagine seeing her. Even though he'd flown all the way from California to do just that, when it push came to shove, he couldn't do it. And so he asked me to pray with him. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to pray. I had no clue what to do. But I did. I prayed with him. And ultimately, he gained the courage that he needed, and he went back and he reconciled with his mom. 20 minutes later, she died. To this day, I think she was just waiting for that moment. I'll tell you, if you have someone that you have a problem with right now, or that they have a problem with you, plan a peace conference. Find a way. Make a move. Reconcile a relationship. E, empathize with your feelings. Empathize with their feelings. Empathize with their feelings. Philippians 2:4, none of you should think only of his own affairs, but consider other people's interests also. You know, God gives us little clues as to what the needs of another person are. God gives us little clues as to what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're responding to. We're supposed to pay attention to them. Now, it doesn't make what they did right. I don't want to tell you that understanding their motivation makes what they did right, but it helps to understand, and it helps to build empathy. Oh, they're having a bad day, you know. Oh, they just lost their job. Oh, they've had unexpected expenses that they can't cover. Oh. having a little empathy helps you to be a peacemaker. It helps you to overcome conflict. It helps you to draw a person out, and to say, oh, I didn't realize you were going through that. See? Suddenly, the tone of the conversation changes. Suddenly, you have an opportunity to be a peacemaker. So plan a peace conference, empathize with their feelings, and the A is attack the problem, not the person. Oh my goodness, it happens all the time. Especially if you think you're losing the argument, right? If you think you're losing the argument, suddenly it becomes personal insults, bringing up all past transgressions instead of trying to deal with the true issue that's creating the conflict. Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer quiets anger, but a harsh one stirs it up. I want to tell you something about anger, and I get angry sometimes. But I want to tell you something about anger. When you, no matter how brilliant your argument is, no matter what you have to say, the only thing the other person hears is your anger. That's it. If you can't talk to them in a rational tone of voice, if you can't talk to them in an even temperament, with an even temperament, the only thing they're going to hear, it's not your brilliant argument, or even the right words that you've said. It's the anger that they'll hear, just the anger. If you want to be a peacemaker, you have to be disarming. We've talked about this before in this series. We have to respond differently than they are responding. And then we have an opportunity to be a peacemaker. Do not use harmful words, but only helpful words, the kind that build up and provide what is needed. How can I help? Those are good words, right? What will make this better? Those are good words. I counsel my couples that are in premarital counseling. I always tell them that it's always appropriate to ask for a timeout. If you're incredibly emotional in the middle of an argument or something like that, and it's okay to say, timeout. But there's one rule that goes with timeout, and that is that you have to agree on a time in. Otherwise, you just end up avoiding, right? And avoiding is something we're not supposed to do. C, cooperate as much as possible. Cooperate as much as possible. The mark of a Christian, one of the marks of a Christian, one of the hallmarks of a Christian is to get along with people. Romans 12:18, do everything possible on your part to live at peace with all people. Now, I admit there are some people that refuse to live in peace with us. It happens. But we have to make a genuine effort to make peace. And I will tell you that peace has a price. And here's the price of peace, all right? The price of too many P's now. The price of peace is pride, right? You're going to have to let your pride go if you're going to be a peacemaker. The price of peace is ego. You're going to have to set ego aside if you're going to be a peacemaker. The price of peace is selfishness. You're going to have to somehow get over that part of your own personality, the selfish part, in order to be a peacemaker. James 3:18, peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of goodness. The process of reconciliation. I know these are really hard words, but this is how it's done. We say things like, I'm sorry. Yeah. I know people that couldn't say I'm sorry for nothing. It's impossible for them to apologize. But if you want to be a peacemaker, that's what you have to do. The process of reconciliation has things like, I was wrong. Or maybe, forgive me. I'm sorry you feel bad. Is there anything I can do? You see, we take the initiative when we're a peacemaker. We do what we can to reconcile relationships. And the last one is E, emphasize. Emphasize reconciliation, not resolution. Emphasize reconciliation, not resolution. You see, especially men, I'm just going to call it out right it is, we're fixers. We like to fix things, right? We want to solve the problem. And we can get really focused on solving the problem. Sometimes solving the problem isn't what really needs to take place. Sometimes restoring the relationship is way more important. Because we're never going to agree on everything. There's always going to be a problem. Always, always, always. God puts relationships ahead of problems. God puts relationship ahead of idealism of any kind. 2 Corinthians 5:18, God has reconciled us to himself through Christ and gives us the ministry of reconciliation. So when Jesus died on the cross, we were reconciled. We were counted as righteous by God, even though we weren't righteous. Right? We've all fallen short. But God counted us as righteous anyway. But he also gave us a job. Read the rest of that. He gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That means as conscientious Christians, we have a job, and that job is to be a peacemaker. Why? Why are we supposed to be peacemakers? Because God considers relationships to be far more important than anything else. Now that's tough, isn't it? Relationships with each other and with him are more important than anything else. Now imagine this. Relationships are more important to God than theology. Believe that? How many churches you know have crashed and burned over some fine detail of doctrine? They're splitting this way and splitting that way because they cannot get along with the other people if that's what they believe. That's not God. It's not the way he works. The relationship is way more important than any fine details of doctrine, and I'm watching the denomination that I grew up in and that I was ordained in crashing and burning right now because of little details of doctrine, and it's heartbreaking. One of the things that I've always told my congregations is that when we get to heaven, we're going to find out we were all wrong. Yeah. And here we spend our lives quibbling over these fine details, and none of it matters to God. He wants us to be in a relationship with each other and with him. That's what matters to God. Relationships are more important than principles. Relationships are more important than laws. Relationships are more important than promises. Can you imagine that? Covenants, if you will. You say, oh no, no, I made this promise, I got to keep it. Not if it destroys a relationship. If it destroys a relationship, you need to rethink the promise. Because the relationship is more important to God than the promise. Colossians 15 says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. So I just want to tell you this. How do you find your missing piece? Invite Christ into your heart. It's as simple as that. Reconciliation is what Christ is all about. God bless.